and Discovery has the runway in sight.
Copy, runway. Discovery descending through 3,000 feet, 3 miles to touchdown. 1,000 feet. Landing gear is down and locked. Main gear touchdown. Drag chute deploy. Nose gear touchdown. And Discovery is home.
Return to flight mission STS-114 culminates at NASA's Dryden Flight Research Center at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Discovery's landing initiates a complex series of activities. The orbiter is recovered by a convoy of over 20 specialized vehicles. A variety of specialists assist the astronauts with systems shutdown, egress, and medical assessments.
I'd like to say hello to everybody, and on behalf of the STS-114 crew, we have had a fantastic mission. We are so glad to be able to come back and say it was successful, and we have resupplied the International Space Station, and we've met the test objectives of the Space Shuttle program. We brought Discovery back in great shape. As you can see behind us, crew was really anxious to walk around and see what the outside looked like, and it looks fantastic. We got a great group of folks here that are taking care of Discovery and taking care of us.
After the initial recovery operations on the runway, the orbiter is towed 4 miles to a mate-demate device, or MDD, where it is deserviced. Once at the MDD, the week-long turnaround process begins, with crews working around the clock in preparation for the shuttle's cross-country return home. 13. Discovery's onboard fuel cell systems are shut down, and the orbiter's electrical systems are switched to ground power. The shuttle is hoisted and aligned with the MDD's work platforms so that technicians may have access to the orbiter's systems. The main engines are flushed of residual fuel to protect the turbopumps from possible contamination. The most hazardous part of the deservicing is the draining of the monomethyl hydrazine fuel from the orbiter's rockets and thrusters. This procedure is commonly called escape, an acronym for the self-contained atmospheric protective equipment that the technicians must wear. It is a lengthy process mandated by safety requirements due to the highly toxic nature of the fuel. Once escape is complete, the aft engine area is prepared for installation of the aerodynamic tail cone. This 10,000-pound fairing is mounted over the main engine nozzles to help reduce drag during the ferry flight. Once the tail cone is in place, the orbiter's body flap is raised to fit flush against the tail cone's bottom, and the landing gear is raised and locked into place. Discovery is now ready to be mated to the Shuttle Carrier Aircraft, or SCA. The orbiter is lifted some 60 feet into the air by the MDD's sling. The SCA, a modified 747, is then towed to the MDD and carefully positioned underneath. The shuttle is now lowered onto 3 attach points on the 747. Once this slow, exacting process is complete, the sling is removed from the orbiter and the shuttle carrier aircraft is carefully towed from the MDD. With the orbiter mounted securely atop the 747, the piggyback pair is ready to fly. Although the weight of the orbiter is well within the SCA's carrying ability, the additional drag forces it to fly at much lower altitudes and much slower speeds than a commercial 747. The 747 makes its long taxi to the 15,000-foot Edwards runway. The flight crew gets takeoff clearance from the tower. The throttles are advanced and the brakes released. After an extended takeoff, the SCA is airborne, and the duo climb into the desert sky. Discovery is on its way home.
From the Dryden Flight Research Center in California, you're looking at the NASA Shuttle carrier aircraft, aircraft number NASA 905. 747 obtained from American Airlines. The aircraft originally built in 1970, turned over to NASA and configured, modified to support transport of space shuttle orbiters following landings away from the launch site at the Kennedy Space Center. Discovery over the course of the last week since its landing at Dryden at the Edwards Air Force Base facility has been configured for the Ferry flight, as it's known, a fairly impressive site with 747 and Space Shuttle Orbiter Discovery following its 31st mission into space on the STS-114 mission. And Discovery just about ready to depart with a shuttle carrier aircraft underneath for the first leg of its trip back to Florida for processing for its next flight, anticipated to be the next shuttle mission, STS-121. Discovery's 14-day mission ended at the Edwards Air Force Base in the pre-dawn hours on August 9th after a 5.8 million-mile journey. The mission ended with a landing Pacific time at 5:11 a.m. On August 9th. And Discovery now on takeoff roll atop a 747 shuttle carrier aircraft, just about to begin the first leg of its return back to the Kennedy Space Center. And the ferry flight of Discovery underway. The first stop, again, planned to be Altus Air Force Base in southwestern Oklahoma. It's about a 3-hour trip from California to Altus Air Force Base. It'll be a refueling stop, weather permitting. A couple of hour refueling stop, and then the next leg will take Discovery from Altus Air Force Base to an overnight stopover at Barksdale Air Force Base in central western Louisiana. The operational altitude for a ferry flight with a shuttle on its back is 15,000 feet. The 747 actually is led by about 100 miles out in front by a KC-135 aircraft, which basically flies weather reconnaissance for the 747 crew to provide near continuous commentary back to the 747 crew on any weather conditions that it could encounter on its route. The KC-135 is known as a pathfinder for exactly that. It basically checks the path for which the 747 with Discovery on its back would follow. There are actually two 747 shuttle carrier aircraft in the NASA fleet. The other aircraft, NASA 911, was obtained about 10 years ago. The footage of Discovery's departure coming from chase aircraft, including NASA's F-15, which is escorting the shuttle carrier aircraft with Discovery out of the Edwards area. The first leg of the trip, again, a 3-hour flight from California to the planned first stop, a refueling stop for the 747, Altus Air Force Base in southwestern Oklahoma. Once Discovery returns to the Kennedy Space Center, with that arrival planned for tomorrow mid to late morning East Coast time, Discovery will then undergo about a 8 to 14 hour demate process from the 747. It'll then be transported from the shuttle landing facility back to its processing hangar, the orbiter processing facility, adjacent to the large vehicle assembly building. And once in that processing hangar, Discovery will begin the process of work to prepare it for its next voyage, which will be the next shuttle flight, currently targeted for March of 2006. The 747 on which Discovery is riding has been modified to support the same attach points that a shuttle has when it's attached to its external tank for launch. Preparations for a ferry flight typically take about 5 days to a week or so. Some of the delays associated with Discovery's ferry flight since its landing on August 9th were driven by Mother Nature, with some inclement weather in the Edwards area that slowed the process of preparations for the ferry flight. But Discovery now on its way, again planned to be a 2-day flight back to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, weather permitting. The first leg, Altus Air Force Base in southwestern Oklahoma, for refueling of the 747, and then a departure mid to late afternoon from Altus Air Force Base with an overnight stopover planned at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. Some of the flying restrictions include flying no higher than about 15,000 feet in altitude. That's driven partially, in fact mostly, by the amount of fuel that the 747 can take on due to the heavy weight of the orbiter on its back. One of the other restrictions is that a shuttle ferry flight does not take place after dark. So thus the requirement for a 2-day ferry flight, particularly when traveling from west to east. Weather permitting, the plan for tomorrow is to depart Barksdale Air Force Base in the morning with a non-stop flight from there to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. That's probably about a 2.5 hour flight or so from Barksdale in Louisiana to the shuttle landing facility at the Kennedy Space Center. Discovery's 31st voyage into space ended with a landing, pre-dawn landing, California time at the Edwards Air Force Base facility on August 9th, completing a 5.8 million mile journey, a 14-day mission that began with launch on July 26th from the Kennedy Space Center. It was the 6th night landing in the shuttle program history out in California, with the and the 50th landing mission that ended with landing out in California. So Discovery now on its way back to the Kennedy Space Center atop a 747 aircraft. Some of the chase plane pictures, views coming courtesy of the F-18, NASA F-18 aircraft that's based actually at the Dryden Flight Research facility out in California, heading off into blue skies for a trip back to the Kennedy Space Center. Discovery now on its way. On the first leg, a 3-hour trip from Edwards to the Altus Air Force Base in southwestern Oklahoma, then for a refueling stop. The next stop, Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, for an overnight stay. And then the plans, weather permitting, will be a non-stop flight Saturday morning from Barksdale to the Kennedy Space Center shuttle landing facility.
This is the Kennedy Space Center Shuttle Control, and we now have live pictures of the Space Shuttle Discovery riding atop the modified Boeing 747 as it approaches the Kennedy Space Center. Plan is for the 747 to land at KSC Shuttle Landing Facility somewhere shortly after 10 o'clock today, Eastern Time. This vehicle departed Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana at about 7:20 Eastern Time, en route to KSC. This is the last leg of the trip following its landing at Edwards Air Force Base, concluding its mission STS-114 that landed at Edwards Air Force Base on August the 9th. Discovery logged 5.8 million miles in space before its touchdown back on Earth in California. Discovery coming back to Florida. A welcome sight to Kennedy Space Center residents as it flies by the Banana River and the Banana Creek area en route to a landing here at the shuttle landing facility. The vehicle did a short flyby of the Brevard County beaches, coming up near the Patrick Air Force Base area up through Cocoa Beach, Cape Canaveral, giving the residents of Brevard County a visual of the vehicle before it touches down and prepares for its deployment back to the operations facility here at Kennedy Space Center. Various cameras around KSC are tracking this as we watch it live from Kennedy Space Center. We have cameras on the vehicle assembly building roof. We have cameras at the mate-demate device and various points along the shuttle landing facility. The 747, Boeing 747 that is actually carrying the Discovery was actually in commercial use at one point in its lifetime. NASA purchased 2 Boeing 747s, one from American Airlines and one from Japan Airlines. The 747 orbiter combination is about 75 feet long, and the entire height of it from the vertical stabilizer of the vehicle down to the landing wheels of the 747 is about 63 feet high. The entire length of the 747 is 231 feet, 10 inches long, with a wingspan of 95 feet. Fuel consumption is 6,154 gallons per hour with the shuttle attached. Just to put that in perspective, the SCA uses 1 gallon of fuel to travel the length of the airplane when it's flying a ferry operation such as this. Coming in on its final approach now, the landing gear on the 747 are down. Again, this is the final leg of a 3-hop flight starting in California, going to Altus Air Force Base in Oklahoma, spending 2 nights at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana before coming in this morning here at Kennedy Space Center. This is a welcome sight for employees at KSC to see the vehicle back in town, moments away from touchdown. Discovery is returning back to KSC. Main gear down. And nose gear touchdown. Discovery is back at Kennedy Space Center. Landing on the runway going north to south. 747 will continue to taxi toward the end of the runway. Once there, it will stop, passing the midfield point right now. Once at the end of the runway, it will stop, and a tow truck will be brought out to it to actually tow it into the mate-demate device, where over the next several hours, Discovery will be lifted off the back of the 747. The 747 will be removed, backed out, and Discovery will be lowered down on its landing gear. And then this time tomorrow, it will be towed back to the orbital processing facility in completion of mission STS-114. Once in the orbital processing facility, the payload bay doors will be opened, and destow operations of the materials brought back from the International Space Station will begin. Discovery is now slated to fly on the next space shuttle mission, currently targeted for no earlier than March of 2006, mission STS-121, back to the International Space Station. At this point, again, the tow will be taken out to the 747. It will be towed into the mate-demate device at Kennedy Space Center, where the orbiter will be lifted off the back of the 747 and begin its processing for its next mission, STS-121. Now that Discovery is back at Kennedy Space Center, this will end the commentary for this mission and for this return ferry flight. From the Kennedy Space Center, this is Shuttle Control.
Hold what you got, man. All the way. know, I'm an old Texas Longhorn. I hope my Aggie buddies will forgive me for that. But there's a fight song at the University of Texas, is that the eyes of Texas are upon you, and that the story behind that is that back the turn of the century, back in 1900, Colonel Prather, who was the president of the University of Texas, used to expound upon this at that time small student body that you know, the eyes of Texas are upon you because you're the selected sons and daughters to come here and achieve great things. Because in those days, not many young men and women went to college or to a university. And he said that to them so often that they actually parodied his statements with a poem, then a song, and it ended up being the school song. But the reason I bring that up is I really indeed believe that the eyes of the world were upon Discovery and STS-114. And I think that there was a collective holding of the breath of the world as they ascended into space and made that wonderful trip and that wonderful mission, and a collective sigh of relief across the world when Eileen made that beautiful landing at Edwards. And so this is indeed, I think it reminds us how this mission, this endeavor that we are a part of, is so important to the future, not only of our nation, but for the world itself, as humankind goes further. All you have to do is look at a 4 or 5 month old baby crawling into the next room, exploring, to understand that it's a compelling need for all of us to do just what Discovery did, and why we must go on and go back to the moon and go on to Mars. And they are starting that transition as we begin this next era of exploration. So once more, congratulations to Discovery. God bless you all, and thank you all for being here tonight.
The NASA Spaceflight Medal is awarded to each crew member of a United States spacecraft upon completion of their flight. It recognizes the courage, dedication, and professional skill that each of them contribute to the success of their mission. In recognition of her outstanding leadership and contributions as commander of STS-114, the NASA Spaceflight Medal is presented to Eileen Collins. You're not supposed to embarrass the commander. In recognition of his outstanding contributions as pilot of STS-114, the NASA Spaceflight Medal is presented to Jim Kelly, Vegas. In recognition of his outstanding contributions as a mission specialist, MS-1 for STS-114, the NASA Spaceflight Medal is presented to Soichi Noguchi of the Japanese Space Agency. In recognition of his outstanding contributions as a mission specialist, MS-2 for STS-114, the NASA Spaceflight Medal is presented to Steve Robinson. In recognition of his outstanding contributions as a mission specialist, MS-3 for STS-114, the NASA Spaceflight Medal is presented to Andy Thomas. In recognition of her outstanding contributions as a mission specialist, MS-4 for STS-114, the NASA Spaceflight Medal is presented to Wendy Lawrence. In recognition of his outstanding contributions as a mission specialist, MS-5 for STS-114, the NASA Spaceflight Medal is presented to Charlie Camarda. Thank you, General Hal, and thank you, Colonel Bob. And I will now turn the podium over to the Commander, Eileen Collins.
Okay, I'm going to try this microphone. Can everybody hear me? All right. Well, I think you can probably see what it's been like for the past, well, it's been almost 2 years we've been training together, and this crew has been absolutely fantastic. And, you know, let me tell you, the recognition that I've gotten, it's all them. I mean, they have done such a fantastic job on this mission, and watching my crew work together as a team under such difficult circumstances has been just a joy for me to go through this return to flight process and see the teamwork and how people come together and really pull off a very, very difficult job. And as I look out here among all the faces in the crowd, and, you know, it actually makes me a little bit sad because the training is over and the teamwork and the work that we did for STS-114 is over, and our teams are going to break up. And although that's sad, I'm thinking about the future. We are going to fly STS-121, and we are going to continue on with the Shuttle program. And I am just so proud of all of you, and those of you that worked STS-114 or that worked at the space station, or if you didn't work on mission, what you do for the space program, or even if you just support us, it just makes me so proud of all that you've done. And I wish we could recognize everybody. There's so many people that worked on this mission, but you are all recognized by us, and we thank you for your labor of love in working on this mission. And we ask you to keep it up because we have even more wonderful things to do in space exploration. And I want to echo everything that General Howell said, that I could tell that really came from his heart, and it comes from my heart too. And, you know, what a fantastic group of folks that we have. We put together a movie that we'd like to show you, and it will be taken around the country and sharing our experience of STS-114 with people throughout the country, in fact throughout the world, and what we do here in our space program, and to pass on really how proud we are of you. So we're going to narrate the movie, and well, I think we've got highlights of a little bit of everything in the flight, and we'll have time afterwards for some questions and answers. So having said that, I'm going to sit down, and let's go ahead and roll the movie. What we did is we put together some shots of training that we wanted to show you at the beginning. Beginning with, this is our traditional get together and do the crew photo at the beginning of training. We have T-38s that we use for spaceflight readiness training, acrobatics, formation instruments. We also have a virtual reality lab. Here, Jim Kelly is doing robotics training with Charlie and Wendy. Soichi's in one of our simulators doing training with the camera for the ET photo. Here he is in the neutral buoyancy lab for EVA training. Steve is doing emergency egress training in the launch and entry suit, and also some tile repair. We did some trips down to the Cape. You see Andy here doing some training on the inspection. He was our lead on the inspection. And Wendy was our lead on transfer. This is the MPLM and transfer training. Her and Charlie worked on that together during the flight. Charlie also worked on the inspection. Here they are practicing the robot arm inspection, and this is the Discovery's wing leading edge that we inspected during the mission. Also inspected in the flight. Well, we finally made it to July 26th. This is the Astro van that will walk out of crew quarters, our strap-in. This is the mid-deck. Wendy's getting in her seat. You see Andy in the background, Charlie's in the foreground. And this is the
let's go for maybe the start.
After many, many years of work, we got this stuff. A lot of experience. The power going better than accelerating to 100 miles an hour.
Discovery, roll program.
Roger, roll. Discovery.
Shooting to the upper left. You see the ET over to the right, the booster on the left. The purpose of this camera was to watch any debris that might fall off. We've got the booster separation here. The cameras on the boosters actually follow them down to the ocean, and you know they're retrieved and used. Back to the lock speed line camera. First time we've flown a camera in this position, it worked quite well. Here's the roll to heads up. You can see the horizon in the background. That is about 6 minutes into flight. Here we are about 8 minutes and 20 seconds. We have main engine cutoff. And shortly after that, you see the forward attach point. We're going to separate from the tank. The tank is going to fall away, and we will pitch around.
Houston Discovery, we have a good +X maneuver.
We'll pitch around and photograph the tank.
Of course, once we were on orbit, we had to configure for on-orbit operations, so we opened the payload bay doors to expose the radiators, and then got about going to work. One of the important objectives of this flight, and one of the great successes, was, of course, the inspection of the wing leading edge and the TPS, and to do that, we used the boom that you saw a moment ago, which carried sensors and cameras on it that enables to record these views of the wing leading edge and the nose cap to ensure that those regions have not suffered any damage during the launch phase. We also used the cameras on the robotic arm to inspect the crew cabin of the orbiter, as you see here, passing a hatchway which just a day before we'd crawled through to ingress on the launch pad. Because we had these systems on board, we were able to survey the entire exterior of the orbiter and verify that it had good integrity and would be safe for entry at the end of the mission.
We got to flight day 3, and this is an orbital maneuvering system burn that we're doing. You can see it's important to hang on down the mid-deck, having a little bit of fun, and we are going about the business of starting the rendezvous and docking with the International Space Station you see here. On the flight deck, I'm sitting up at the commander's seat, and Steve's up there with me taking some pictures. It gets pretty crowded upstairs, and we're doing this. Charlie's helping out with checklists. Andy is photoing out the top window. Wendy's up there with the handheld laser, and Eileen's on the left flying us up to Space Station. Rendezvous and docking went very well. One of the things that we did on this flight that had never been done before was the rendezvous pitch-around maneuver. And this allowed the people aboard the station, John Phillips and Sergei Kriklyov, to take pictures of the orbiter. And so what Eileen's doing here is pitching us 360 degrees, and the station crew members are taking pictures of the exterior of the shuttle. And it was from these pictures that we were actually able to see the gap fillers that we'd remove later on in EVA-3. But as you can see, this is a shot never before seen from our flight, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. So this is what it looked like to the folks aboard the International Space Station. In parallel, this is what it looked like to us on board the space shuttle. This is, we're almost all the way through the maneuver now, coming back up to where the space station is going to be directly above us again. You can see it climbing above the tail as it went back up. From there, Eileen flew the twice orbital rate V-bar approach, and we got up to the front of the station. You can see sunset happening here, and we're actually going to dock with that white circle that's right in the middle of the screen. Here's the aft flight deck. If you look out the window directly above Eileen's head on the left there, you can actually see the International Space Station coming down into view. And the next photo is going to show you as we come down into a docking with the docking system, and we get to a mated configuration.
Probably the next anticipated moment on the flight is hatch opening, certainly for the space station crew. And as Vegas already mentioned, we were joining up with Sergei Kriklyov, who just started his cumulative third year in orbit, and John Phillips. And there's Steve coming on board. There are a lot of traditions that are associated with the space station. One is the tradition that we borrow from the Navy, which is being gonged aboard with the ship's bell. Another tradition is right here. It's a Russian tradition, and when you have visitors, you share a piece of bread with them. There's Eileen taking a small slice of bread, and Charlie as well. We had been told by the station flight controllers that John and Sergei were really anticipating our arrival, and you know, as anybody who has house guests, they spend a lot of time cleaning up for us. And I want to tell you, as the person who is in charge of transfer, they did a tremendous job. We're taking you on a little bit of a space station tour right now. We just went through the node, which was nicely organized. We're going through PMA-1, which is the wall of CTBs. Now we're entering into the Russian segment. We're about to enter into the FGB. It's not always easy to translate in space, but you get to do fun things like this. So hold on to your seats as we rotate around. The FGB right now is a little bit of a storage area. You can see a lot of the transfer bags that are stored on the floor. But again, John and Sergei have done a great job organizing everything for us. Some areas are small, and so you have a traffic jam. Here's Charlie going high, and our cameraman is going low. And now you're into the service module, which is a great area to hang out. We shared every meal, dinner time that we could with the station crew. And it was a rare opportunity that we had just to hang around for a little bit. You see Sergei and Eileen enjoying a little bit of a break. Those moments were few and far between. And literally, as soon as we got on board the space station, it was time for us to start robotic operations. Vegas and I were the prime space station robotic arm operators. One of the first things we had to do was grapple the boom and hand it off to the shuttle arm, and you saw that maneuver right there. The next flight day, it was time for us to install the MPLM.
Meanwhile, down in the mid-deck, EVA folks are preparing for the first spacewalks. Yes, we are doing very hard, degassing the water bag to make sure you can fill the full volume of the water before the EVA. And make sure I put the pants on before we get out. And you can see the big digital camera floating behind us and waving. That's the sign language in Japanese. Thank you. And Steve Ray is very happy before opening the door. This is a shot from mid-deck that I'm going outside. This is a view from outside that we make sure that we are starting the EVA. And the very first task was the demonstration of the on-orbit repair of the TPS. And we'll check the tools one more time before we start the demonstration. The first demonstration was Stevie Ray did crack repair for the RCC. He used the NOAX, the non-oxide adhesive experimental, and that's using a spatula, Steve doing Iron Chef in space. It's like peanut butter. And I'm using the tile repair, we call the EWA, emittance wash applicator, using a Shugu type application to the damaged tile. And this shape we call it a PGT shape. I thought it was representing Japanese island. And both demonstrations were great, and we will move on to the fun part of riding the arm, and let Steve Ray describe the ride on the arm.
Riding the arm up and seeing views like this was a great way to spend your first couple hours outside. We spent a little over 20 hours outside and with the 3 EVAs, and it was just a real pleasure to work with Soichi-san. We're just spacewalk brothers after so many years of training together. This is the helmet cam view of climbing around on the space station. That's what it looks like. And when Soichi's out on the end of the arm carrying that big control moment gyro that he replaced, that's what he looked like. Spectacular view. Here it is being installed in its carrying location back in the payload bay. We brought up a new one and replaced the broken one on station. Soichi is checking his hair. Look at that big vortex pattern on the ground there. The things that you can see while you're doing an EVA are truly wonderful. It was time to, if you look at that little spacewalking guy off the nose of the orbiter, that's EV2 working on moving up to the gap filler. Wendy was flying the arm with Vegas's help. Andy was supervising. We reached out and pulled out those gap fillers that were a little too far forward for us to be comfortable with. And the ground team put together a wonderful plan for us. It worked great. And we were pleased that the gap filler came right out. It's a little red RTV on it. That's the stuff that bonds it together, although not perfectly, obviously. And this is Soichi and I were sort of taking pictures of each other as we came back, and this is what the gap fillers really look like. They're sort of a cardboardy type substance.
Vegas and I got to do some repair work of our own, only indoors, and this was an RCC plug, reinforced carbon-carbon plug demo, where you would actually repair a hole in the leading edge, and this was a carbon silicon carbide produced by Diacol. Here is John Phillips, Vegas, and Wendy putting in one of the payloads we brought up, which was the HRF rack, and John was very happy to get this because that meant he had a legitimate reason to be on station and do work. Now, the real brains behind transfer was Wendy, of course. We were basically her drones, and Wendy, and thanks to Cindy did a fantastic job, and really the best way to transfer this cargo is basically form a conga line. And when you have several people, this is me tossing some bags which were tossed to me out, and this is going back in, going to Andy. Seems to be a little bit overloaded here. Looks like an old Lucy flick, but and then he's passing them off to Wendy, and of course Eileen was the water person that collected all the water, and here Sergey, Vegas, and I are wrestling with that famous ZSR rack, and we're trying to figure out just how does this thing go together and put it all away, and we actually did figure out how to do that and got it in place before we came home, and I'm happy. Wendy did a masterful job also on the arm, like you heard, and her and Vegas both flew the MPLM and put it back in the payload bay. And of course, we had a great time visiting our friends and colleagues in space and eating with them and getting to sign the logbook on the International Space Station. Too bad we had to say goodbye. You notice Eileen is at the hatch, and she's making sure we really do get back on the vehicle and come home.
After saying goodbye, we had to go ahead and leave, and this is a view of Discovery undocking from the International Space Station. And one of the really fun parts of the mission, especially for me flying this, was to do the what's called the undock and fly around. And Eileen and I have switched positions now, and I'm in the aft flight deck flying this, and Charlie's now got the handheld laser. And essentially our job is to fly around, take pictures, and look out the window. So this was several exciting views of the International Space Station. We actually do a complete circle around it, and we take a photographic survey to make sure that we know what the outside of the vehicle looks like. So, and beautiful views of the Earth in the background. And after that, we do a final burn to say goodbye to the space station and start working our way back home.
After we'd undocked and left the station, we had a down day, of course, and we had a wave-off day. That gave us a little time to relax and enjoy the environment. Here you see Steve and Soichi trying to figure out what to do with some EVA batteries, and Vegas expressing his frustration at never becoming a pro footballer. And we, of course, did some serious science, studying the rotation of bodies in free space, much to the consternation of the EVA instructors who own that tool. And Eileen is demonstrating the technique for climbing into the bag and going to sleep each night. Of course, on these flights, exercise is very important. And we kept our commander healthy and allowed her to exercise as necessary. While she was doing that, the rest of us were just pigging out at the galley and having a good time. Some of us got to play with our food, as you see Eileen and myself here, looking at the behavior of this liquid drop and spinning it up to see what would happen. Of course, Soichi watched all this. I don't think he was very impressed. I think at this point he just wished he had a pair of decent chopsticks to catch his food.
Payload bay doors are closing, and yes, it is time to come home. We got an extra day on orbit as we waited for the weather to get better in Florida. Here's Weddy suiting up in the middeck. But we didn't get to come home on the first try as the weather was bad in Florida, so on the second try we did our entry into Edwards Air Force Base in Florida. And you get a look at the displays that we use on the flight deck. Our entry was at night, and in fact we landed about 1 hour before sunrise at Edwards. This is the view looking back out the overhead windows. That's the plasma trail that forms above the shuttle, and you get another view from here. I don't get a chance to turn around and look at this, but our flight deckers in the back get a chance to do that, and I'm glad they filmed that for us. This is from the ground at Edwards. It's an infrared view, which is the heat that you can see that has built up on the outside of Discovery. You can see our nose, the RCC on the nose gets the hottest. This is the pre-flare. We're getting ready to do the landing. The gear is down. And we touched down on runway 22 at Edwards. After some post-landing checklists, we walked off the Astrovan and got a chance to walk around and look at the exterior of Discovery, and we found that it was in absolutely great shape. We got a chance to say hello to our families here who unfortunately were in Florida, but we did get to come back and see them the next day. I've seen many people raising their hands out there. Just in conclusion, as you saw the film and the things that we were doing, we were thinking about all of you that we had worked with over the past 2 to 4 years as we did all these, and we mentioned your names up there, and we have had some very good times, and the things that we were all taught by our instructors and our flight controllers stayed with us, and that's really what made our mission so successful. Okay, so with that, I think what we'll do is a crew's going to take turns answering questions. So I got one person here that... Okay, I want my crew to answer questions, so we're going to start here and we're going to go down. Andy, you start. Okay, I give in. Okay, the question was on the workday. Wait, we don't work, our workday really is based on the launch time, which has to do with meeting with the space station. So it kind of begins there. You know, our day starts based on when the space station is going to be flying over Florida so we can do a rendezvous. And there's a little bit of play there, but it's only about 5 to 10 minutes launch window. And we also need to sleep shift to meet with the space station crew's sleep schedule. And then we also have to sleep shift to be able to land at the right time. And what we did on 114 was we sleep shifted earlier. So like on flight day 2, we went to bed 2 hours earlier than normal. Now, it really doesn't matter what time it is in Houston, because the folks in Houston that worked in mission control, they had to work with the on-orbit schedule. So I know that a lot of you were working through the night and there were just some crazy hours down here, and everybody was so careful about making sure that the crew got to bed on time. We were worried about you guys getting to bed on time. So there's nothing we can do about that. Okay, there's a question up here in the corner.
Far more important mission is you struggling for the price of vacation.
Okay, I think we can start on this end. since Andy had so skillfully talked me into taking the mic back, he's asking about the strike that you threw at Shea Stadium.
You know, I had lots of my family and friends up in the box watching this at Shea Stadium, and I had my wife Melinda brought a baseball glove to New York. We were out in Central Park throwing the ball to make sure I didn't embarrass myself in front of all of New York, because New York is a really tough set of fans out there. Eileen definitely threw a strike. The person that I threw it to said mine was a breaking pitch. I think that was a kind way of saying it didn't quite make the strike zone.
I'll tell you, I am a lot more calm launching into space than throwing a baseball at a major league game. I was very nervous. Let's see, we got a bunch of questions on this end, but okay, I see your question right here.
Can you describe the patch?
Well, this flows very well into the next crew member. Describe the patch. Steve.
Well, the great thing about the patch is if you do ever get a sticker, this description is on the back. Well, there is a description on the back. It may not match the one I'm going to give you. The patch has been around for a long time, actually, and we have had 18 different names on that patch. Because initially we were to transport a space station replacement crew up and bring the other one back, and that crew kept changing, and then we gained Wendy and Andy and Charlie, so we finally settled on this patch. And we chose the crew members by whether the names would fit on the patch or not. The Earth at night is just something you see a lot in space. You don't see very often on patches. We wanted to show as much of the Earth as possible. Of course, the launch of the orbiter, and that blue orbiter up there. I'm sure you've all seen the 107 patch. That's the representation in the commemoration of the Columbia vehicle and the crew, the 7 stars. And if you look closely at the 1 Star of David, and then the blue orbit with the 3 of the EVA team, EV1, EV2, and the IV from left to right, and then Soichi's the rising sun of Japan, signifying his birthplace. So it's a pretty simple patch, and that's the way we wanted it, rather representational.
Okay, I think we had a young child over here. Go ahead. You know, I think I recognize this one of students at my daughter's school, and she is here. My daughter is here tonight. That was the question. She's sitting in the middle at the top. Okay, question down here. I see a lot of faces that are familiar. Okay, we'll go back to this side because I've got a couple of hands over here. Okay, young lady. Okay, Soichi, this will be for you. What kind of food do you eat in space?
Yeah, we have various kinds of food in space, like tortillas and chocolate. And this time we brought a lot of the good Japanese food, curry rice, ramen noodles, and the very good ones, the chocolate-coated strawberry, and everybody loves it. And we left a bunch of them in the station crew so that they are not bored for the next 3 months.
Okay, question up here. Okay, how do we develop our memorial for the 107 crew? I think, Andy, you want to take?
Yeah, that's something we worked on before the flight. In putting it together, I wanted to capture some of the spirit of exploration, as well as some of the history that's taken place in space exploration, and I wanted to do it in a poetic and meaningful way, and that was how I chose the words that were in there and how the poetry was chosen. I also wanted to have full representation from our crew as well as the space station crew, and that's why everyone had a part to play in it. For those of you who don't know what this is, we did a tribute on Flight Day 10, I believe, to the crew of Columbia, as well as the crew of Challenger and Soyuz 1 and Soyuz 11. These are crews who've paid the ultimate price for flying in space, and we wanted to acknowledge their contribution in some way. And I would encourage you to go to the NASA website. You can actually find this tribute there as we narrated it from space, and I think you'll find it worth doing.
Okay, back down to, how about way up on the top? Okay, does somebody want to repeat the question from the young man? Oh, the question is, how do you dock with the space station? So I'll let Jim Kelly answer that one.
Yeah, very carefully. The docking is actually flown by Eileen. If you remember in the video, she was wearing the pink sweater in back. And essentially what we do to dock with the International Space Station is on the orbiter we have 44 little reaction control system jets that are controlled by hand by Eileen in the back. And so she's using a couple of different things. The primary thing that she's focusing on, if you saw her looking to the right, she was looking over by Wendy's head. She's looking at a camera that shows the center line view, and it had those crosshairs in it that you saw shooting for that circle right in the middle of the International Space Station forward end, and that's actually what we dock to. So as we get closer, it's a very team effort. Eileen is flying, hand flying, looking out the back window and controlling all the reaction control system jets. Wendy's in the window, and she's got the handheld laser just like a traffic cop, seeing how fast you're going. So she's pulling the trigger there and providing information for Eileen. I'm up front looking at a computer screen that actually is giving us data from another sensor that we have outside in the payload bay that also gives us range rate information, so I'm feeding that to Eileen. And then Charlie was down lower in the aft flight deck, and he was responsible for all the docking systems. So when you saw us come together and join up and mate, that's the process that's going on. Eileen's flying, Wendy and I are giving her information, and Charlie, as soon as we dock, is running all the docking system to make sure that that ring that's extended, and you can see the shock absorbers, actually pulls down about 18 inches and then joins up, and then we're hard mated together, and then we stay that way for a little over a week. So that's pretty much how the process goes.
I've really got to say something about the pink sweater. You know, you see these shirts we're wearing. You know, we have to agree to buy these shirts before we fly, and I could never talk these guys into a pink shirt. So the pink shirt and the pink sweater were, you know, my final word on that. Okay. Do we have another question? I haven't gotten anybody in the middle. Okay, we got. How about this gentleman? What it feels like in takeoff. You want somebody from the mid-deck to... Wendy's happy to answer that.
Yeah, you get a much better view on the flight deck. But those of us that are down on the mid-deck have a good time as well. Even though the orbiter flight deck area and mid-deck area is a lot more spacious than, say, an Apollo capsule, I was right next to Charlie, and I have to tell a fun story about Charlie. This was Charlie's first flight in orbit. If you watched him during the movie, you realize that Charlie had a smile on his face the whole time. As you're going through the launch count, in about 3.5 minutes before the engine's light, you can actually feel the engine bells swing. It moves the whole vehicle. So that's your first sense that, hey, I think we're getting ready to do something. Then the engines light off, and there's a slight vibration on the vehicle. Then the SRBs light off, and your one thought is, wow, we're going to go somewhere, and we're going to get there fast, because it immediately throws you down into your seat, and it feels like somebody's starting to sit on your chest. Well, as soon as the engines lit off, Charlie just started laughing. And he's looking over at me, and he's hitting me, and he's grabbing my hand. And I don't think you stopped laughing until we got to main engine cutoff at about, yeah, wheel stop. Charlie was great to fly with. It's always fun to have a first-time flyer with you, because I think they do really just enhance the whole experience. But it's kind of like going down a really, really rough train track. I mean, you really feel the vibrations. You certainly feel the accelerations. The first 2 minutes under the SRB, a lot of power. It really does feel like somebody's sitting on your chest. In fact, I have an older brother, and I got to talk with him from space during my first flight, and I told him that, hey, ascent feels just like when we were kids and we used to wrestle. You'd win, I'd lose, you sit on my chest. And as a true older brother, he said, I was so glad I could facilitate your training at such a young age. But surprisingly, this was a very, very smooth ascent. In fact, one of the first things I remember talking to Eileen about once we got to space was, wow, what a smooth ascent, what a smooth ride. As soon as we got rid of solid rocket boosters, it was almost like you were just driving down the road in a car, very, very smooth. But the vehicle's continuing to accelerate, so about the last minute and a half of the ride, there's a great sense of acceleration. In fact, you cap out at about 3 times the force of gravity, 3 Gs, again, right through the chest. So right at that point, it gets a little bit hard to breathe again. But I have to say that that feeling goes away quite suddenly when the engine's cut off. And that's when you realize you're in space, because everything around you starts to float. And it's a great experience.
Okay, I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions. We're going to go back to the middle. How about this gentleman?
Yeah, you mentioned some traditions that were on the International Space Station.
Okay, his question is on traditions on the space shuttle. And, you know, the whole flight, I think, is full of traditions and things that we normally do. But Andy? Okay, I'm being reminded by my crew of, I don't know if this is a superstition or not, but we play cards before we walk out the door to go fly. We have a deck of cards in crew quarters that frankly has been there since STS-1, maybe longer, but I actually pulled a deck of cards out in quarantine one night and started playing, and I was warned, oh, don't use those cards. Those are the cards that we've used since STS-1. And I think the way the rules work is it's like poker, but the commander has to lose before you can walk out the door. So if you're ever late, then you know why. Okay, one more. We'll do one quick question. How about the lady right in the middle? What was the funniest moment on the flight? Charlie, and you got to be able to.
Well, one of the funniest moments that some people thought was real funny was when my first taste of transfer, Sergei Krikalev threw a Coors docking unit at me. And it's fairly heavy, but in space, you know. And I caught it, and Wendy was just, she was laughing a lot as I went tumbling around in the node trying to wrestle with this Coors unit, and she proceeded to tell everyone else on the crew, and they had a very good laugh out of that. That was one of them. You want to add that? It's going to be fun. Again.
Now, halfway through the mission, I finally realized what it was like watching Charlie translate. And it reminded me of Pigpen, because, you know, Pigpen walks around and there's just all these particles of dust following him. Well, Charlie would translate through a module, and there would be all these articles being knocked off the wall, translating with Charlie. And invariably, we'd be finding things and going, oh, it's got a purple dart. Charlie, this is yours. Because he'd knock his stuff off the wall and we'd have to give it back to him. But late in the mission, Eileen lost her spoon. And if you've ever seen space food, you'll realize that your spoon is your critical utensil. That's really what we use to eat everything. So fortunately, you have 2 spoons. So Eileen was not in a position where she couldn't eat. But she probably went, what, a whole day? More than a day, she could not find her spoon. And she offered a reward. If anyone on the crew found her spoon, they would get a reward, although you never did state what the reward would be. No, it was not landing the shuttle. Nice try, Steve. So about a day and a half later, Charlie's down on the middeck, and he's rummaging through his fanny pack, and he unzips it, and he pulls out a spoon, and it has a red dot on it. And red is the commander's color. And Charlie gets this look on his face like, oh, no. I didn't even let him get to fess up. I immediately floated up to the flight deck and like, Eileen, we found your spoon. And guess what? It was in Charlie's fanny pack.
Well, I was happy, but there was no reward. Sorry. Okay, you can see we just feed off each other. So this is probably, there's more, but this is probably a good time to cut it off before we get too many stories. Thank you.